Hello and welcome again to Vote Chat. Vote Chat is brought to you by the University of Otago's Department of Politics. My name is Peter Grace. We're here in front of a live audience today at the media production studios of the university, and we're also being live streamed, so welcome everybody. As always, you can feed your questions to us through Twitter, and Nicole is on our Twitter desk, so here's Nicole to tell you a little bit more about that.
Thanks, Peter. So for those of you in our audience or watching us on the live stream, you can ask questions today of our guest. We're joined by Laila Harre, leader of the Internet Party. As leader, Laila is an authority on the policies that have been released so far and the party in general. So if you want to know more about the party policies or about the direction the party wishes to take, you can tweet them to us. To do this, log into Twitter, form your question, and direct them to our Twitter handle, @OUVoteChat. Or alternatively, you can use the hashtag VoteChat14. Throughout the show, I'll be putting your questions to Laila, but for now, it's back to you, Peter.
Thanks, Nicole. Yes, we're thrilled to have Laila Harre with us today in the studio, so welcome and thank you for coming.
Thank you.
We've got a lot of questions for you today. I'm going to ask you at the beginning, if it's possible, and we haven't really discussed this, but whether you can wear two hats today. We're lucky to have somebody with your experience in New Zealand politics and also a leading politics student in your days at university. So we'd like you to wear one hat, which is about that, and perhaps the other hat about the Internet Party, which is, of course, why you came today.
I am all my hats.
You're both hats, all hats, great. It's an exciting time for politics here in New Zealand. There's a lot of great things happening, a lot of reasons to feel energised about politics. I'm going to ask you to put your parliamentary hat on first, your experienced hat on, and tell us a little bit about why you think it's an exciting time.
I think we're seeing the maturing of MMP and some of the changes that come about as a result of that. But I also think we see a lot of political confusion, and that is represented probably most strongly by the fall-off that there's been in voter participation in recent elections. There's been a sort of gravitating of the established parties to this bland centre in terms of their rhetoric, their visions, the kind of message they're giving to New Zealanders. And that doesn't prompt people who are thinking about politics for the first time, connecting to causes, to participate actively in our political process. And I think what's been missing and what Internet Mana provides in terms of a role in our political ecosystem is a kind of innovative, courageous, uncompromising voice around issues of social justice and in terms of the Internet Party technological digital development. What I feel so excited about is the weaving together of those two strands of politics. It is very different and it is provoking a response. It's provoking debate, and that is the first step towards people participating in politics, whatever the result is in terms of the way they vote.
You were saying that last night you were at New Plymouth and at a meeting there where you said there were a lot of high school students.
Yeah,
so you're seeing a lot of new faces.
That was amazing. New Plymouth isn't a core place where we're strongly organised. It hasn't traditionally been a stronghold of the Mana movement either. Mm-hmm. So the people who came out last night really do represent people who have connected with this very, very recently. And we had, a really good turnout. I mean, we've had full halls around the country. We had an enormous hall to fill in New Plymouth and we didn't quite get there, but we had a very, very good turnout. What was so impressive were the number of genuinely young people, and I'm not just talking people under 40 here. We had young high school students in large numbers. When I asked people to put up their hand, how many of them were voting for the first time, lots of hands went up. When I said, how many of you aren't old enough to vote yet, this huge number of hands went up from the audience. Young people who are like I was at 15, beginning to become politicised, looking at what's on offer and feeling, you know, they were clearly inspired by the message they got last night.
Do you think there's going to be a difference in this generation in terms of the way they think about politics?
I think there is, and I think that there is... well, I think there's a need for the generation to define its own political parties and its own political institutions. I think the message we get from the youth voting numbers and generally youth disengagement from sort of traditional institutions of social democracy is that they would build them differently. And I'd love to see what that looks like. I mean, I have real optimism in the ability of young people to take leadership and change the way we do things. And I think my job as a progressive leader is to help create the space for that to happen in and not try and control the outcome. And I love that about the Internet Party.
So as a new leader of a new party, are you seeing things being done differently? Is there something that's quite different from your past experience? Very
differently, and that's really because the people who have put the Internet Party together and invented it, really, created it from nothing in a very short period of time, haven't come from traditional political parties. That's a plus and a minus. I've brought in some of the more conventional knowledge of running election campaigns, the opportunities that you get simply because you're running an election campaign. But the real strength that we've got in our engine room of the Internet Party is people who have engaged with young people particularly through social media, through new media, through culture, music and so on, and don't even think inside the political sort of boundaries. So the ideas they have are quite different from the ideas you have in a conventional political campaign, but we're bringing those two together. I mean, not only are we incredibly strong on our digital presence and, you know, a lot of our marketing is online and understanding how that works, but we're also the only party, Internet Mana, that is running old-fashioned, hall-to-hall, town-to-town, city-to-city stump election meetings. They're different from the old-fashioned ones. There's music, there's talent, and there's candidates and leaders. But, you know, we're doing the best of the old and the best of the new. And I think, you know, that's really drawing people in.
Mm-hmm. Your background, of course, you've spent most of your career on workers' rights and working with unions and things. Have you had reaction from the unions as to, you know, are they thrilled that you're running?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of support. Well, first of all, the union movement is strongly mobilising people to get out and vote this year. Yep. Before I came into this role, I was setting up the CTU's Get Out and Vote campaign, and that seems to be going really well. And it's the first time the union movement has actually worked in a united way to mobilise voters using the power of the workplace and their relationships and communities. The union movement is committed to a change of government as well, and those within it who kind of get the politics here understand the importance of Internet Mana being part of that mix. So, yeah, I mean, to me, it's not about what the union movement think of us, because I'm part of the union movement, yep. And so are many of the people who are active in Mana movement particularly, but also to a lesser degree in the Internet Party. And it's always been a broad church. I mean, there's, you know, every flavour of politics within unions.
Okay. And of course the Internet Party started out as being basically a single issue party, and that's broadened quite quickly. How have you seen that broaden?
What single issue was that?
Well, the Internet. I mean, it's called the Internet Party.
Yeah, it's called the Internet Party, but that doesn't mean it's ever been a single issue party. I mean, it's the kind of philosophy of the Internet is a philosophy of freedom, independence, innovation and connection. And the Internet Party took its name from the internet because that is the kind of spirit that we want to invest into politics. It was born with 6 sort of key priority areas, one of which is universal cheap internet, which is kind of a basic human right nowadays if you're going to live in the world we live in and participate in it fully, but also in the sort of top 6 issues: environment, responsive democracy, education, modern schools, free tertiary education, which is also a fundamental of a knowledge-based society. So, I mean, the environment and so on. I mean, the Internet Party wasn't born as a single-issue party. It's a big idea party, though, and we like to see ourselves as in the spirit of the internet. Look, this is the most amazing piece of infrastructure that is globally available, and nobody owns it. I mean, let's keep it that way. This is something worth fighting for and protecting our right of neutral access to the internet, and protecting the internet from the attacks by intelligence organisations and overseas corporations. It's totally worth fighting for.
Okay. Well, speaking of the internet, we've got our first Twitter question, so Nicole.
Yeah, so you've just outlined the spirit of the Internet Party, but Jonathan Gills is worried you're a minor party. Going into Parliament, you can't promise the earth. What is your party baseline?
Okay, I won't promise the earth then, because we've already got that. I think you can see here in me, and there are many other examples of people who have made a big difference from a relatively small position in Parliament. I mean, if it wasn't for New Labour, which broke away from Labour in 1990, and the other parties that formed the alliance, we wouldn't have paid parental leave, we wouldn't have Kiwi Bank, we wouldn't have got rid of the youth minimum wage, which this government has now reinstituted, we wouldn't have 4 weeks annual leave. These are just some of the really important successes that small parties, in this case the Alliance, were able to deliver from a minority position in Parliament. What you need is tough people who have a real commitment and compassion for this country, and the ability to build support from the community outside Parliament, because none of those changes get won by either a minority or a majority in Parliament. They are won by the relationship between the democratic representatives in Parliament and a wider community who keeps campaigning, who keeps pushing, who keeps raising demands, and by doing that we keep winning.
So what is the party baseline, though? If you're sat down at the table with Labour or National, what is it that you absolutely will not budge on?
Well, first of all, we won't be sat down at the table with National. I think we've made that really clear. We want to see John Key and the National Party disestablished from government. And so we're not even keeping the smidgeniest bit of an option open there, as some of our mates are, and we're certainly not playing cat and mouse like Winston Peters is. That's just irresponsible, and his voters deserve to know whether he would support National in government after the election. Our position is that we are going to use whatever position the voters deliver us in with, to focus first on the shared priorities of the Internet Party and the Mana movement. And we've been setting those out. They include some basic social justice policies like feeding the kids, the Mana movement's school lunch program, our cheaper universal internet policies, free tertiary education, and some policies which we're yet to release around the right to work, and the level of benefits and some of the welfare area. So those are really important issues.
These are your no compromise policies?
Well, I don't think the no compromise thing is that helpful. What you go into Parliament to do is to fight for the program that you've put before the voters, and that's what we'll do. we'll do that with, hopefully, enough votes from Labour and the Greens, together with ours, to make some of this happen. There'll be some things we have to fight quite hard on. For example, the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, which we are vehemently opposed to, is nothing more than a charter for US corporations. It's a danger to our intellectual property rights, our environment, our medical, health services, and so on and so on and so on. And Labour are equivocal at best on the agreement at the moment, and we know that they're deeply divided on the issue. We'll be building public campaigns to move them to opposition, because we won't have the numbers on our own, given, if National and Labour gang up on the TPPA, we won't have the numbers on our own to stop it. So we have to push with the community for Labour to change its position on that agreement, and I think we can do that.
There's a lot of quite far-reaching ideas, for instance, the tertiary education being free, and that are going to require quite a lot of bartering too. I mean, how likely is that to happen?
Well, I think we can achieve it by building, again, a movement of support around this. I mean, of course we can do it. Look, I got a free tertiary education. Guessing your age, you've probably got a free tertiary education too.
I'm getting an expensive one now.
Right. And when I got my free tertiary education, New Zealand was a poorer country than it is now. So clearly we can afford free tertiary education. We've proved it before. It's a basic requirement of the social contract. A free tertiary education makes that generation understand what it means to live in a society and a community, and creates a sense of social solidarity and reciprocity and so on, which I think really informs our professionals and our leaders in educational institutions and so on. So for us, it's sort of fundamentally important. It's also economic sense. I mean, every country that has introduced free tertiary education has, within a very short period of time, like 10 years, overtaken us in terms of their economic development, particularly in the tech innovation area. So for us, it's just a no-brainer, and we believe that the resources are available to do it. At the moment, individuals are paying or borrowing money, so the money's there. It's just a matter of collectivising it in a different way. A capital gains tax, we're developing with Mana the financial transactions tax policy. There are a whole lot of funding mechanisms that are unexplored in New Zealand and are overdue for a good hard look.
Okay. Our research team spent a bit of time looking at your policies and trying to determine exactly what you mean by the digital economy. You're promising quite a lot in terms of growth from that. So if you were able to clarify that for us a little bit, there's a few things I know that haven't been announced, but how do you see this digital economy working? Where are the actual mechanics of it? And obviously that's going to go a long way to paying for things like free tertiary education.
Yes, although we can afford free tertiary education from our current economic position as a country. As I say, we're already paying for it. So it's just a question of how we're paying for it. This isn't, we have a massive sort of engagement in tertiary education already. What do we mean by the digital economy? Two things. One, we mean businesses that are enabled to develop and expand and utilise the resource of the internet. So part of the digital economy is the infrastructure of the internet itself.
Yes. And access to it.
And access to it, and the security of it. So, for instance, we haven't got a hope of attracting big data centres, for instance, to New Zealand with our current internet infrastructure, because we have a single cable linking us to Australia and the US. Yep. aside from the issues that raises in terms of pricing and the monopoly of the Southern Cross conglomerate, it also means that we're at high risk of failure of our internet in New Zealand. So for internet-dependent business, we need a second cable. So we need to improve our infrastructure, and all businesses, and not just business, but other sort of factors in our economic wealth, like our education system, good health services, and so on, stand to gain significantly from utilising the internet.
I can see there's a great argument in terms of if you build it, they'll come. The more access you deliver and the faster the broadband, and that the more businesses can take advantage of it. But what other kind of businesses are you talking about?
Well, every sort of business. I mean, we've just done our road trip through Northland. Clearly, there is massive tourism potential in Northland. If you are wanting to grow a tourist sector in Northland, including small tourist companies, you know, not just the big conglomerates, but the kind of mum and dad businesses that you would expect a New Zealand tourism industry to favour, you haven't got a chance. I mean, in Kaikoi, I couldn't even connect on my cell phone, let alone get an internet connection. So, you know, the ability to sell a tourism product now depends hugely on your access to the internet. I mean, what person here doesn't go online to book your accommodation, to look at what's on, to pre-book tickets? We all do it. If you want to go to Northland, then the businesses that you're connecting with are only going to be those businesses in places that have a usable, you know, accessible internet connection. So, you know, any business sector can benefit from this. In farming and you know, in our agricultural sector, the ability to market products, to learn stuff, to share knowledge, I mean, it's all internet based now. It's just basic infrastructure. So that's the infrastructure side. But beyond that, the internet is part of doing this. We need to develop our sort of tech sector, and in particular the sort of tech products and software development and so on that New Zealand can export without any disadvantage of distance. So the great thing about the internet is that it completely obliterates the problem of distance, provided that we've, you know, got access to it and got a secure channel to the rest of the world. And we know what, you know, would be possible with that. South Korea 20 years ago, also an agriculturally dependent country at the time, decided that they wanted to transform their economy along, you know, into a high-tech method. They transformed their education system to do that. They made tertiary education accessible, and they invested in the internet. Now, the standard internet speed in South Korea is 100 megabits. I live 2 kilometres from the heart of downtown Auckland, and we get 8 megabits, and I share my home with an internet-dependent business. So, you know, that's what we're competing with. And South Korea's unemployment rate has gone from over 10% to 2.6% in that period, and they've completely transformed the kind of standard issue jobs and economy that they have.
Okay.
So,
we've got
there's great examples.
Another Twitter question, which I think is relevant to what you've been talking about.
Yeah, we had a response to your free tertiary education policy. For many students, it's not so much a worry of while they're at university, but more what happens after they graduate.
Yeah.
So Stuart McKenzie has tweeted in, and he wants to know what you're going to do about the lack of tertiary level jobs for students after they graduate.
Well, I mean, this is exactly the problem that we're discussing, really, that we have an economic model that has run out of jobs. The traditional industries that New Zealand excelled in, protected manufacturing, farming, mainly dairy, but also meat in the past and wool, and forestry, have just not been able to keep up with the growing workforce and the educational achievements of that workforce. So we stopped producing enough jobs to employ New Zealanders 30 years ago. In that time, we've heard a lot of talk about knowledge waves and so on, but we've actually seen no action, and this is why we need to make a sort of massive investment in an alternative major set of industries based on the digital economy, based on access to the internet and within the tech sector. And that will have a significant impact on graduates from other disciplines as well. It's not just people who do computer programming or engineering or whatever, the sort of more tech-based subjects. Anything like that expands the opportunities for everybody to work in, a wider range of fields.
Okay. You've been quoted in the NBR recently as saying that you wouldn't have been comfortable granting Kim.com residency. Can you tell us a little bit about that quote and where that came from?
Yeah, it wasn't just the NBR. I mean, what happened was that the government released under the Official Information Act emails from the SIS, which showed that the SIS had told the Immigration Service that Kim was being investigated by the FBI, that was known to the Immigration Service at the time that permanent residency was granted. Now, the fact is that under our normal immigration procedures, and this isn't at all a commentary on Kim as an individual, I have enormous respect for him, and I'm very glad he is in New Zealand and is contributing in the way he is. But at that time, or today, if somebody is under investigation by an overseas police authority, our rule books say that they shouldn't be granted permanent residence. So no minister should have proceeded with approval of an application, or in the case of Jonathan Coleman, although he didn't personally approve it, he delegated the approval to his officials, but he was briefed, as we now know. He denied that, but now we know from his officials that he was briefed on that investigation before they gave the approval. Now, you've got to ask why. I mean, we also know from those emails that the Immigration Service told the SIS that they were under political pressure to grant residency. Now, why would that be? And, the question you have to ask is, was residency granted in order to expedite the FBI operation and enable extradition? I mean, of course you have to ask that question.
So your view is that is exactly what happened?
I want to know.
Right.
I want to know the answer to that question, and we should all want to know the answer to that question, because if that were the case, then that is a complete abuse of our immigration rules and procedures. Leaving aside it's an injustice to Kim himself, it is just a complete abuse of our rule of law, and I want to get to the bottom of it.
Okay, and so you're looking at a Royal Commission of Inquiry into this?
Not just into this, but this is one of the issues that we would like a Royal Commission to investigate. We basically have no confidence in this government to investigate this in a fair way. John Key has already clearly expressed his opinion of Kim.com. In fact, I think he's completely put himself out of contention for managing the extradition process, because he has made such a clear political, made it very clear what his his political view is on that. Some of us have been more careful than that, but we can't trust him to appoint a ministerial inquiry on this. A Royal Commission needs to look at a number of things. It needs to look at these particular circumstances, but it needs to look at them in the context of New Zealand's relationship with US in particular, law enforcement agencies, in the case of the FBI, and security services. It needs to get to the bottom of the illegal spying on Kim.com and 88 other New Zealanders by the GCSB. Now, Kim.com at least knows that he was illegally spied on. The 88 other New Zealanders don't even know who they were, and they're entitled to know that, and they're entitled to seek accountability for it, because that means our laws were broken. You know, we can't just keep sweeping this stuff under the carpet. So we want to get to the truth of that, but we also want the Royal Commission to look more widely at the whole at the implications of New Zealand's sort of tie-up in this security web, both in terms of the rights we have as New Zealanders to freedom from spying and prying, but also the responsibility we have not to be a hub for poking around in the lives of people all around the world who are going about, you know, lawful, if political or other activity, and we don't want New Zealand to be used as a hub for spying on other people, and we don't want to be spied on either, for going about the normal process of democratic participation. Okay,
I mean, you have mentioned the fact that, you know, about lawful goings on. In the case of Kim.com, of course, the SIS's comment was that he was a bad man but a wealthy man.
I find bad an interesting term, don't you?
Well, it is an interesting term. Well, I mean, he was a convicted felon, so, I mean, I think that's what they're alluding to.
He was convicted, I mean, that's their conclusion of it, all right? But I mean, let's just get the record straight on this. The convictions he had were German convictions, which had been clean slated. So, I mean, and I mean, he's given plenty of public explanation of that. In fact, it's one of the highlights of our road trip meetings is the story Kim can tell on his own behalf about his previous convictions. Okay,
he was also let in on the Immigrant Plus.
The high rollers, we call it.
Yes, precisely, yes. and had to put down 10 million in government bonds in order to get into the country.
Right.
This is, of course, the same one that Maurice Williamson and Michael Woodhouse had some issues with a few months ago with Dong Hua Liu, who was also on the same program.
Well, their issues were rather different from that. Maurice Williamson's issue was that he had called the police to interfere in the process of a police investigation.
Precisely, but it's the same program that they were both let into, the high roller one. So do you agree that this high roller program is a good thing, or would you have
to be honest, I haven't looked at it in detail. I'd like to know what the evidence is of migrants coming through that category improving New Zealand and increasing, you know, like, well, I mean, to me, it's just an evidence thing. The reason that you might have a category like that is because you can show there's a demonstrable economic development benefit to New Zealand from it. I don't know the answer to that question.
Michael Woodhouse said that the number of people who are in on the program were about the same number of people who are in this room today.
So that may well be the case.
Seems they're going to have to do an awful lot of work to or pour a lot of money into the country.
Well, you could have 10 times the number of people in this room on it and still get no benefit for New Zealand from it. So, to me, the issue is simply evidence. Does this program increase economic opportunities for jobs for New Zealanders? And if the answer to that is yes, you then go through a normal policy process about what might be the downside of it, what might be the risks of it, and assess it from that point of view. I'm not an anti-immigration person. I'm not an anti-rich person either. But rich immigrants who come here, just like anyone else, should be able to show that they're going to deliver a benefit. And if it's an investment benefit, they have to show a result from that. Can I ask you a question about... I'd like to see the evidence.
Can I ask you a question about rich people and politics? Because, you know, obviously Kim.com's putting a lot of money into internet mana, or at least into internet. We don't know about mana.
Yeah.
we have a history in politics in New Zealand of rich men funding parties. We've got Bob Jones, we've got Alan Gibbs and Craig Heatley at ACT, and now we've got Kim.com. Where are the lines drawn?
Well, I can see a really clear line between those ones. I mean, in that case, you've got
in terms of
two people, two rich men funding rich men's parties and one rich man funding poor guy's party. So there's a big difference between those two scenarios.
Yes, well, there's definitely a question, but when it comes down to it, it's about agenda, isn't it? It's about rich men with their own personal agenda starting up parties.
The important thing is...
Or it might be about that.
Well, the agenda here is to get a transformation in New Zealand politics. And, you know, we are so lucky to have the opportunity and the resources to get a little bit more of a level playing field. I mean, we're nothing like a level playing field in this election in terms of the resources available to us, but a bit more of a level playing field for a party that stands unequivocally with those who are at the hard end of disadvantage in this country. Now, I think we're incredibly fortunate to be in that position, and it's the first time that we've seen someone with large personal resources put those resources to the benefit of the most disadvantaged people in this country, and I think that's to be celebrated.
Okay, Nicole's got a Twitter question.
Yes, so we had a question come in on the emails from Stephanie Woods, who would like to know how you feel about Winston Peters ruling out working with Internet Mana.
Well, I think that Winston Peters should tell his potential voters whether he is going to support a national-led government or a Labor a government that Labor is the sort of biggest party in, because his voters deserve to know whether their vote is going to be used to prop up John Key or to shift John Key and his government out of office. Of course, if he chooses to back Labor and the Greens and Internet Mana in a government, we'll work with him. I mean, there is so much policy overlap with New Zealand First and, you know, those parties and ourselves in some important areas. But boy, if I were considering voting for New Zealand First and I wanted to change the government, I wouldn't take that risk.
There does seem to be a danger that this is going to decline. The small parties are going to decline into a big squabble between each other. I mean, New Zealand First has already said that Conservative Party is stealing all of their ideas. The Greens have levelled a similar accusation against you. Is the MMP going to come unstuck as these little parties get more and more power?
If that's all that the media want to report on, then yes. I mean, and I have to say, you know, even in the 12 years that I've been away from kind of frontline political work, there's been a big change in the way that the mainstream media kind of report politics and the role they play in making politics. It's all, I mean, there's always been this sort of symbiotic relationship between the press gallery and Parliament and so on. But the news cycle now where, you know, that we've got senior journalists blogging, you know, these short sort of vicious blogs and things, it's just a kind of bizarre scenario. And I'm really concerned about the impact that has on the seriousness of political journalism and the weight that you can give to the message that you're getting from those reporters and the analysis you're getting from those reporters.
So you're saying that the fighting isn't between the small parties at all, but it's actually being caused by the media?
Well, I haven't even talked to Winston Peters, so that, how can I fight with him? I mean, I'd love to get on a stage with him and challenge him on a thing or two. Right. But the fact is that we're not fighting with each other. What you have is a reporter coming up and getting someone to make a nasty comment about someone else, and then you're going to that person and asking them to respond to it. And it is a complete sideshow from the things that really, you know, matter to voters. And unfortunately, it does have the effect of turning voters off politics altogether, and we can't afford for that to happen.
Okay, so come election day, hopefully you'll have lots of success. And
what
will you be doing with it? What will you be doing with it? You've got 6 weeks before the Mana Party agreement changes, I suppose.
We don't know whether it will change or not. The agreement. Yeah, so obviously the current phase we're in is the election campaign itself, and that is also, I think, really cementing in the Internet Party Mana movement relationship. The power of those public meetings in Northland and Wairakei in particular, but also beyond there in other areas, is phenomenal for cementing the relationship between the Internet Party and the Mana movement. Yep. It gives it real logic and real credibility.
But you've got cementing to do, obviously, between the other parties as well.
We will be going into Parliament as a kind of united group, and I have every expectation that will just grow stronger. But with the distinct kind of differences of the Internet Party and the Mana movement intact, because, it's not like the alliance was where all these parties merged into a single identity. We want to preserve the independent identities of the two parties, and we're working together to achieve some common results, and we'll do that in Parliament, I think, very effectively. And we will talk together to other parties in Parliament.
Except
obviously... Well,
it'll be disestablished.
We certainly won't be supporting National to form a government, but we'll talk... politics is about getting stuff done, and so that doesn't mean that we would disengage if National form a government from influencing the policy program of the next 3 years, but we're certainly not going to be giving them votes on confidence and supply, not in a million years.
But also, a lot of the things you're fighting to achieve are going to be by and by if a National gets in. The TPP, the free education, everything will be watched.
Don't put your money on that. There is an awesome force of people out there who are going to fight with us to stop the TPPA, whoever is the government. And I believe we can win that. We can win it whoever the government is, because we can show the force of New Zealand as opposed to it. The number of even organisations that support this, you could count on the numbers, the fingers of one hand. There really is not a public movement for it. And we stopped the MAI, the Multilateral Agreement on Investment, in 1996, when National was the government, through a global campaign. Actually, it was the first successful internet campaign, and the Alliance led the New Zealand arm of it. And we won, and we didn't get a multilateral agreement on investment, and now we're back fighting the same issue again, but we'll win again.
Okay, well, we've got one more minute and one more question from Twitter.
Yes, so you've asserted that it's the media running a bit of a sideshow here. However, you have just announced you're going to be running in the Helensville electorate. So they're not the sort of people that the Internet Mana Party are necessarily appealing to. You said before, poor people is who your party hoped to reach. What's behind the Helensville decision?
No, what I said was that we're the first case of a wealthy person backing a party that stands with poor people. We have plenty of people in our organisations who have good, high levels of personal resource, but they also have a heart and compassion, and they want to live in a socially just country. What the Helensville campaign allows me to do, which I can't do in any other way, is get on a platform with John Key, because I think that he owes us some explanations. I want to take the challenge directly to him, and the place to do that, the only place I've got to do that, is on the campaign platform in his own electorate.
Well, unfortunately, we have to wrap it up there. Thank you very much for joining us today, Laila. That was very interesting. And thank you for joining us. We're back again next week with Asanati Lola Taylor from New Zealand First Party. You're welcome to watch us again on YouTube at OU Vote Chat. We're going to Also, they'll obviously take feedback from you over the next couple of days in terms of any questions you've got for the upcoming interviews. So thank you again for joining us, and see you again next week.